Hi there. Welcome to the channel, where we dive into thought-provoking stories that challenge perspectives and reveal the truths hidden in our everyday lives. Today's story is about a fateful encounter between a young black man, Jamal, and a police officer, Randall. Their lives collide at a busy train station in a way that will change them both forever. It's a story of bias, regret, and redemption. A journey that reminds us how the smallest moments can have the biggest impacts. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification. That way, you won't miss any of our powerful stories designed to spark conversation and inspire change. Now, let's get into today's story. Officer Randall Wells stood rigid at his usual post in the morning's chill, scanning the bustling train station with a practiced, but critical eye. His gaze settled on Jamal, a young black man with headphones, waiting for the next train. Randall's eyebrows pinched together. To him, Jamal's presence at the station was suspicious, maybe even trouble. As Jamal glanced up and met the officer's stare, he felt an uncomfortable pang, but he tried to ignore it. He couldn't afford to be late for work again. He'd only just secured a promotion at the tech company downtown. His mother, a proud housekeeper, had been thrilled when he shared the news last week, saying it was a step toward all he'd worked for. Her words lingered in his mind, keeping him grounded. Randall walked over and stood close enough to let Jamal know he was being watched. "Where you headed, kid?" Randall asked, a harsh tone coloring his words. Jamal sighed, fighting the urge to respond with frustration. "I'm just heading to work, sir." "Work, huh?" Randall repeated, skepticism thick in his voice. "And where's that exactly?" "At Noble Tech." "I'm an IT specialist," Jamal replied, holding back his annoyance. "Can I help you with something?" "My train is about to arrive." Randall scoffed as if finding the notion improbable. "We'll see about that. Empty your pockets?" Reluctantly, Jamal complied, pulling out his phone, keys, and wallet, feeling the eyes of bystanders on him. Time slipped away as Randall went through the motions, asking invasive questions that had nothing to do with his job. Jamal could hear the screech of the train pulling in and then leaving the station. He bit his lip to hide his frustration, the heavy reality of his missed opportunity sinking in. Finally, with nothing left to justify his suspicion, Randall nodded dismissively. "You're free to go." Fuming, Jamal shoved his things back into his pockets and watched as the last car of his train vanished into the distance. He took a deep breath, calming himself, and reminded himself it wouldn't be the last train. Later that evening, Randall returned home, his workday fading behind him. His housekeeper, Lydia, was dusting the shelves in the living room when he walked in. She smiled politely, used to his silent nod in place of a greeting. But tonight, Randall seemed distracted, almost unnerved. He glanced around, uneasy, as if looking for something he'd forgotten. "Long day?" Lydia asked, cautiously breaking the silence. Randall nodded, the day's events playing on repeat in his mind. "Yeah, something like that." He paused, something nagging at him. Lydia tried breaking the ice with more conversation. It's not the norm, but she sensed that something was really weighing on his mind. "Today is my son's first day in his new job. He's been trying to upgrade for a while now, and just made a breakthrough. He's gotten a promotion. I lectured him about starting a new job and most of all about being at work early to make a good impression." "He's an IT specialist." "An IT specialist?" asked Randall. "Sir, he just got a job at Noble Tech. He was so excited about it." She chuckled. "Told me it was his first day today." Lydia's face softened with pride. "How old is your son?" Randall quickly asked. Lydia proudly started to give full details about Jamal because no one has ever asked. She gave him his age, height, skin color, and that he always has his headphone on. Something churned in Officer Randall's chest. That description matches the same young man I encountered at the train station this morning, he thought. Could it be? No, he dismissed the thought. At that moment the phone rang. It was Jamal calling his mom to see if she wanted anything at the store on his way home. She said no, but sensed an uneasiness in his voice. Is everything all right? Yes, just that I missed my train this morning and went to work late. Randall felt a wave of nausea rise in his stomach as the realization washed over him. The boy he'd harassed today, the one he'd delayed to the point of missing his train, was none other than Lydia's son. The knowledge gnawed at him, guilt, regret, and shame all colliding within him. The next day, Randall took a quiet but decisive action. He approached Lydia and asked to increase her pay, mumbling something about recognition for her years of dedication. But Lydia saw the change in his eyes. Something had softened, a quiet respect replacing his usual indifferent demeanor. As he watched her work that morning, Randall couldn't shake the image of Jamal's face, his steady gaze as he tried to hold back frustration at the station. And for the first time in years, Randall felt compelled to make a change, both within himself and in how he saw the world around him. In the days that followed, Randall couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd treated Jamal. He'd never questioned his own actions before. But this was different. Every time he saw Lydia moving around his house, doing the thankless tasks that kept his home clean and welcoming, guilt weighed heavier on him. How could he show up at work, keep his head high, knowing he'd so wrongly mistreated her son? Finally, one evening after dinner, he cleared his throat, deciding to approach her. Lydia, I want to apologize for how I treated your son at the station. The words were harder to say than he expected. I didn't know he was your boy. I'm sorry. Lydia paused, setting down the dishes she'd been drying, and looked at him, her face calm but guarded. She'd worked for the Wells family for years, yet Randall had never said more to her than the essentials, never taken an interest in her life beyond his immediate needs. He didn't tell me what happened, she said after a long pause, but I saw he was upset that evening. Jamal isn't one to complain. He said he missed his train because of something at the station, and I didn't ask any more than that. She looked Randall in the eyes, a flicker of pain and strength there. But sir, I do want to ask, would you have apologized if he wasn't my son? Her question took him off guard. Randall had never been forced to examine himself like this. He shifted uncomfortably, searching for a response, but he realized the answer that came to mind wasn't one he liked. I don't know, he admitted, the words catching in his throat. Lydia nodded, her gaze never faltering. I appreciate the raise, and I appreciate the apology, she said quietly. But there are a lot of mothers out there, sir, who have sons like Jamal. And they can't protect their boys from people's assumptions. Randall felt the weight of her words settle over him, something he'd never felt before. In that moment, he realized this apology to Lydia wasn't enough. He needed to face Jamal. The next morning, he arrived at the train station earlier than usual, his uniform feeling heavier than normal. He spotted Jamal standing near the platform, scrolling on his phone, and took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation. Approaching him, he cleared his throat to catch Jamal's attention. Jamal looked up, surprise and wariness in his eyes. Officer Wells? Randall nodded, feeling the heat of shame prickling at his skin. Jamal, I need to talk to you about the other day. He paused, glancing down before meeting Jamal's gaze. I was wrong. I had no reason to hold you up like that. And because of me, you were late to work. Jamal blinked, his face a mix of emotions. I wasn't just late, he replied. I missed an important meeting that could have changed my position in the company. My manager wasn't happy. It was my first day, and you made me look irresponsible. Randall swallowed, feeling the sting of Jamal's words. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he knew he had no excuse. "I can't undo that," he said, his voice low. "But I am sorry. I owe you and your mom a lot more than an—" Jamal studied him for a long moment, finally nodding, though his expression remained cautious. "Thank you for saying that," he said, though his tone was far from forgiving. "But it's going to take more than an apology for people like me to stop being seen as suspects just for existing." Randall nodded, feeling a surge of respect for Jamal's strength. He knew that a single apology wasn't enough. Jamal's words haunted him as he returned to his post, determined to do better, to start seeing the people around him not through suspicion, but as individuals with lives, families, and struggles of their own. Days passed, and Randall began taking deliberate steps. At work, he found himself challenging colleagues whenever they dismissed complaints from people like Jamal, pushing them to look deeper, to question their own biases. At the station, he started giving every commuter the same respect he would expect for himself. One day, he saw Jamal again, this time accompanied by Lydia, who was beaming with pride. She'd come to meet her son after his promotion was finally secured, and as Randall watched, he felt a swell of gratitude for this second chance. And in that moment, he realized this journey wasn't about redemption in the eyes of others. It was about becoming a better man, for himself, for Lydia, and most of all, for the world they shared. Randall couldn't help but smile faintly as he watched Lydia and Jamal talk animatedly at the station. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had hung in the air during his first encounter with Jamal. Though they didn't acknowledge him, Randall felt an odd sense of relief seeing them happy, knowing he'd taken steps to right his wrongs. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Later that evening, Randall sat in his modest home office, flipping through an old notebook he used to jot down random thoughts and observations. He wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. "What can I do to fix what I broke?" He knew an apology and a pay raise wouldn't erase the years of ingrained biases that had shaped his behavior. He also knew that being a police officer came with immense responsibility. He was a gatekeeper of trust in the community. And somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that. A quick search online led him to a community meeting scheduled for the following week, focused on building better relationships between law enforcement and local residents. The flyer emphasized conversations about systemic racism and equity, things Randall rarely thought about until recently. It was uncomfortable, but maybe discomfort was what he needed. When the day came, Randall arrived at the community center dressed in plain clothes. The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Residents of all ages and backgrounds had gathered, along with a few other officers. Randall spotted Jamal and Lydia seated near the back. Jamal's face tightened when he noticed him, but he said nothing. The meeting began with a panel of speakers sharing stories about their experiences with law enforcement. A woman recounted how her teenage son was stopped and frisked without cause, the humiliation and fear still evident in her voice. A young man spoke about being overlooked for jobs because of his record, stemming from a minor infraction during a traffic stop. The stories were raw, and they hit Randall hard. Finally, during the open discussion, Randall raised his hand. He could feel every eye in the room turn to him, the weight of their judgment palpable. "My name's Randall Wells. I'm a police officer," he began, his voice steady but low. "And I'm here because I've made mistakes, big ones. I profiled a young man recently. I held him up without cause, and it cost him more than just time. That young man is in this room, and I owe him more than an apology." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people glanced toward Jamal. Randall took a deep breath and continued. "I've spent years thinking I was doing my job the right way, but the truth is, I was blind to how my actions affected the people I'm supposed to serve. I'm here to listen and to learn, but more importantly, I'm here to change. The room was silent for a moment before the moderator spoke. Thank you for sharing that, Officer Wells. Change begins with accountability. After the meeting, Randall approached Jamal and Lydia, who were speaking with other attendees. Jamal gave him a measured look, his arms crossed. I didn't expect to see you here, Jamal said, his tone neutral but curious. I didn't expect to come, Randall admitted. But I'm glad I did. I need to do better. For people like you. For your mom. For everyone I've overlooked. Jamal studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll hold you to that. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. In the weeks that followed, Randall took steps to integrate what he learned into his life and work. He volunteered to mentor younger officers, emphasizing empathy and fairness in their interactions. He pushed for bias training in his precinct and advocated for more community engagement initiatives. Word spread, and while some colleagues ridiculed him for caving to pressure, others admired his resolve. Jamal, now thriving in his job, heard through his mother about Randall's efforts. He still hadn't fully forgiven him, but he acknowledged that Randall was trying. And one afternoon, when Jamal saw Randall at the station helping a confused, elderly black man find his way, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, people could change.